Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Josef Schovanec, former French government advisor. He's an activist in the field of autism and human biodiversity. During daily lectures and gatherings, he invites visitors to discover and enjoy his native country, the Autistan, the place of weird and thus fascinating human people. Dr. Josef Schovanec.
So hello everyone. I don't know if the mic changes anything, or I can do it without the mic. Do you hear me? Okay, perfect. Sorry, excuse me. So it's my pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for all the people who invited me for this maybe unusual presentation, but unusual because some people are actually unusual. So people like maybe this guy, I don't know him. He probably doesn't like much the daily noise of our modern world. But is it an illness? Is it a mental illness, or is it just being normal? What does it mean to be normal? And let me ask, dear friend, a question as an introduction. What do you do in your spare time? What are your hobbies? And what does it mean to have a hobby? For instance, let me tell you a story. I have to spend many days every year attending official meetings about disability. And at those meetings, we always see more or less the same people. One of my friends represents their blind people. And at the last meeting, he made a very nice presentation about all those issues, the obstacles that blind people face in order to reach books and read books. That presentation was absolutely marvelous. But at the end of the presentation, I just told to my friend before the whole committee, you blind people, you are probably the only one who really care about books in the modern world, because, so to say, normal people don't read books anymore. You see, you have to be a bit strange, a bit unusual to be really interested in books. And that's what I would call the ultimate autism test. Imagine if you want to sort autistic people from non-autistic people. You create a kind of compound, an apartment, something like a Julian Assange flat in London, and you put the person in that flat or compartment, and you wait 1 week. If the person, after 1 week, is terribly bored and has used the Facebook or whatever social network during the whole stay, that means that the person is not autistic. But if during that week the person has read I don't know how many books, if that person has written encyclopedias, maybe that person is one of our own. You see, so thanks God we have different kinds of people. And maybe being different, having this kind of peculiarity, or some people would say disability, maybe that's what the modern period needs the most. Because 99% of the people work, think, and behave more or less the same. And we need the very different people that will have new ideas. And that's probably, that will be the topic of the presentation. But let's continue a little bit. And let's talk about time. As you know, in every language, there are different terms and different words to speak about time. In Arabic and in Semitic languages, I think there are two terms. There is the term waqt and the term zaman. Actually, zaman is not a Semitic word. They are very different. Zaman is the planified time. It's a Persian loanword. It doesn't appear in the Quran, as far as I know. Waqt is the Semitic term. It's the unplanified time. That's what appears suddenly. Zaman is the one that you can have a schedule. For instance, today, you at 10 o'clock, you have this activity. At 11, you have this one, etc. And by the way, the English word time is related to zaman. I didn't put the whole etymology here. That's the, this one is really the autistic stuff. Some of my autistic friends are really into etymologies. You say any word you want, and they will just tell you, like an encyclopedia, what are the roots in Old Lithuanian, in Sanskrit, in all those very strange languages. And sometimes I just wonder, if really that language exists. Sometimes you hear names of languages, and they are just fascinating. But maybe we can remember that there is the planified time, and then there is the unexpected one. The unexpected, which is the sudden appearance of things. And we should make maybe a distinction between those two of them. Because in my opinion, the planified time, the zaman, so to say, is the least productive. If you spend your whole life having planified meetings, having planified interviews, having planified schedule, I do believe that actually at the end of the day or at the end of the year, the actual result will be pretty slim. And I can tell you a personal experience. I have worked for many years for politicians, even sometimes for very top politicians. They have very, very busy schedules, of course. But themselves, they know that at the end of the year, actually they have achieved very little. Why is that? Because actually they are only in that planified time. There is no room for the unexpected stuff. There is no room for the waqt, so to say. And maybe we should think about that a little bit more. In terms of creativity, I do believe that the unexpected, the hidden that appears, is the most important. I have heard that here at KAUST you have seen the movie Ratatouille. Is that correct? Or do you know that movie? Certainly, yeah. So in that movie, what's the story basically? The story is about a rat who wants to become a cook or a chef, And my personal belief is that the rat in Ratatouille is an autistic rat. That can sound very weird or very funny. Let me try to explain. At first, what distinguishes the rat, the hero of the movie, from other rats? And usually every rat eats anything. Any kind of food is okay for a rat, but not for this one. This one rat has very specific, so to say, a very specific taste. He can eat very limited number of foods. Then, have you also noticed how passionate he is? I mean, for him, the only things that matter in life is cookery. And he really, really becomes an expert in that field. And he's ready to sacrifice just anything for that. Ready to sacrifice his own life in order to save the cook or cookery book, his favorite book, of course. Have you also noticed that that rat has some form of synesthesia? What's synesthesia? Synesthesia is, so to say, an additional feature, and many people with autism have that peculiarity. It means that those people see words in color and hear in color. For instance, a person with synesthesia, whenever that person hears some kind of music, that person will see a color. Or let's say a letter, every letter in the alphabet has a specific color. And every word has also a specific color. And in the movie, if you paid attention to that point, whenever the rat of the movie eats a specific kind of food, suddenly on the screen you have just one color that flashes. Maybe you have noticed it or not on the movie. I think that's absolutely typical, so to say, of this feature of synesthesia, which is frequently part of autism. And have you noticed also that there is another very unusual character in the movie, and that's the son, the owner, the new owner of the restaurant. And actually the owner is actually very, very unusual. He cannot negotiate with his employees. That person also is absolutely socially awkward. And maybe that's precisely why that relationship between the so to say, autistic rat and the autistic human being happens. Of course, it's a movie, but it's pretty much telling the real skills, the real knowledge. It cannot be acquired or reaped through a curriculum at the university. The real knowledge, the real skills comes from the hidden activity that the person has during many years. That may sound a bit theoretical, but I will try to enter into concrete details. I will just watch the time. Yeah. And so precisely that's what I will try to show you during the rest of the presentation. And so, yeah, maybe we could have also in the field of autism, we can have a discussion about actually autism in the history of humankind. I have had a chat with Judy Singer. So Judy Singer is the person who created the term neurodiversity. Nowadays, you will hear about neurodiversity all the time. But actually, neurodiversity, the term has a history, and it was coined by Judy Singer. And I had a very fascinating talk with that person that was last year in Canada. And she actually explained me that actually God doesn't like very much social people. And if you read the Holy Scripture, all the time God prefers, so to say, people that are not in the crowd, that spend time in the desert alone, It's a very, very singular pattern. For instance, people like Imru al-Qais, they were not chosen, to be a prophet, and there is a reason behind that. Probably Imru al-Qais was very smart, but he just did not have the required profile, Well, we could have a long talk about that, but let's maybe go directly to the modern period, and let's talk about modern things. That will be maybe easier. You most probably know a website called Wikipedia. But do you know who is behind that? Do you know who writes that website? So we'll have a talk about that. So a basic hint as a beginning, most of the people behind Wikipedia are actually, so to say, people of my ilk, so to say, autistic people. And I have the chance to know many of them. So have you noticed that there is Wikipedia in Old English? Old English, that's this. So Beowulf ves ien virde beon zet anne micherneles in English avrit. I think if you read that, it means that you have some mental issues now. And if you write that, it's even worse now. So imagine that there is one guy who writes this, and of course the whole Wikipedia was not translated in Old English, but many pages and articles were. And that person, completely unknown, who is behind the Wikipedia in Old English, I happen to know him. Not directly, because you cannot meet him, but already I have some contact with him. And so his nickname is Elfgar. So, of course, it's not his real name, but there is a trick to join him. If you write him an email, he will answer to your email only if you spell his name correctly. That means with those two letters joined. If you separate the two letters, he will never answer you. Because it means that you don't understand anything about Old English, So that's his criteria of being social with people or not. By the way, the Elfgar has had a very sad story. For many, many years, he has been homeless, So the Wikipedia in Old English was written mostly by a homeless man. He has lived in the bushes around the University of Oxford, although he's not British. And you will ask, why the University of Oxford and why not, let's say, KAUST? because the University of Oxford is the oldest or one of the very oldest universities in the English language. So when the Oxford University was founded, Old English was still more or less in the memories of people. So I don't know if around the coast there is a homeless person who writes about pre-Islamic poetry or whatever in Wikipedia. That could be a guy of our own. But there are many other people, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you one of the most famous persons in Wikipedia, a good friend of mine, by the way. So, of course, it's not her real name, Tsagvalren. So, if you have read anything on Wikipedia about horses, be sure that it was written by this person. About horses, but also on many other topics. And so that person actually is a school dropout. She doesn't have a job. And the very worst part of it, she cannot ride a horse. So the leading expert in horses actually cannot ride a horse. But from her earliest childhood, watching horses and learning about them is her, so to say, ultimate aim in the life. And what's quite funny, at the age of 35 right now, she has written literally tens of thousands of scientific papers about horses. I know so famous researchers at some famous universities, they don't publish even one single paper a year. And they are world famous and all that. And that person is unemployed and has made tens of thousands of articles and papers, about horses and many other things. So maybe we should have a moment, of reflection on that topic, actually. And it reminds me always a scene. I can maybe tell you that anecdote. That about 2 years ago, I was the advisor of the French Minister for Disabled People, or Disabilities. And during one meeting, I was trying to promote those friends with autism working for free, and nobody gets a salary from that activity at Wikipedia or similar places. And the minister suddenly interrupted me, and she said, "But if they are not paid, why do they do that?" And now I was very, I said, but respected minister, it happens that some people even nowadays are in love with knowledge. It's an illness, no? What do you believe? Well, it could be. I could say many anecdotes. For instance, if you travel with many books in your suitcase, usually at the airport, it's considered a security threat because there's too much paper in the suitcase. Try it next time. Just funny. And so once, a journalist has interviewed some leading people at Wikipedia and asked the same question. What is your secret recipe? How to become, so to say, a great contributor or prolific contributor to Wikipedia? So the answers were very straightforward, and usually with autistic people, the answers are very straightforward. So the first things that was said, first of all, as soon as you get married, you will not have time and energy and resources to contribute in a correct or prolific way to Wikipedia. So the rule number 1, don't marry. That's a joke. The rule number 2, don't have a good job. If you have a good job, you will devote most of your time and your energy to that planified time. Remember the Zaman. And then you will not have time for the unscheduled events. And so to say, we could sum up this in a sentence, woo to the successful. If you are too successful on Facebook, if you have too many friends, then probably you will not be able to be autistic or productive in that autistic way. It's maybe painful because nowadays, whenever we talk about research and universities, you are supposed to have a very good network. Networking is the key to everything. So I don't know if you use also the term, but in Oman they use the term vitamin wow. You have it also, yeah. Sorry, and so we have had a discussion about Wikipedia, but let's talk about the universities per se. And so the universities actually were designed during the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance period for a very specific kind of people. I would say that may sound a bit provocative, but I think I could talk at length on that topic. I believe that actually universities during the Middle Ages were created by and for weird people. They were, so to say in the modern language, universities were autistic safe spaces during the Middle Ages. And that's pretty clear why. Because at that time, people were fighting each another. There were those very muscular warriors that were trying to kill the other tribe or whatever. But in parallel to that, there was a tiny minority of people who devoted their time and energy to very, very weird things, such as learning, such as writing books, and very, very obscure questions occupied their minds, questions about philosophy, about theology, or whatever. And actually, the name university comes from that Latin sentence, universitas magistrorum et scholarium, that means, so to say, the conglomerate, the adjunction of very different kind of people. The university was not supposed to be a homogeneous environment. That was quite the opposite. That was the place for the unusual, for the, so to say, humanly surprising. And what it meant in the past to be a great scientist or a great researcher. So those scientists, that old science, I would call that the old science. The old science had a very distinct set of properties. And at the end of that slide of this small list, we will see how far it's actually similar to a standard profile in autism. So first of all, in the days of yore, the knowledge was motu proprio. It came from the person, and it did not come from the environment. So to say, in the Middle Ages, you could become a wise person because during many years, you and by yourself, you did, so to say, the job. And it was not because you graduated from this or that university. No. Then next point, those people, they were, so to say, they had collections. They collected items. And even people like, for instance, Newton. Whenever you say Newton, people always think about the law of physics or whatever. No, that's not correct. Mr. Newton devoted 99% of his time and energy to very obscure things. He collected manuscripts about whatever esoterical knowledge possible. And that was such a shame at that time that actually his manuscripts were locked in a box. And the box was opened only many centuries after his death, in order not to threaten the so to say, the memory or the honor of that great scientist. And you see actually how this part, that collecting part of items, is behind, so to say, almost any, so to say, research or really creative research. As for me, I'm sorry for doing that, but I collect water bottles, plastic water bottles. One day I will open a museum of plastic bottles. That would be great, I think. But then another point maybe, that those people worked always across the boundaries of, so to say, different fields of study. Being a polymath, Nowadays, you don't have polymath anymore. But being a polymath, that meant to have knowledge in many, many different fields of knowledge. And it was pretty common. If you take, even in the Muslim or Islamic world, Hayam, for instance, you could say many of them. Those people were polymath, or Al-Ghazali, etc. They were polymath. That means that they were interested and very knowledgeable in many different fields. And the creativity comes from the combining of the knowledge in different fields. And sometimes, those people, they create by themselves a new field of research, But nowadays, the university is structured in such a way that you are supposed to belong just to one lab, for instance. You are not supposed to study everything at KAUST, for instance. Well, that could be an idea to allow students to study everything. Well, that's the next step, maybe. And so to say, I will come back to this picture later. And until quite recently, universities worked that way. In the 19th century, the leading universities were German. And those universities were very specific. How did they work? Who was behind them? Actually, only very weird people were at the universities, the German universities in the 19th century. First of all, the university was not meant to get professional skills. No, the university was your house for your whole life. You were a student forever. And nowadays it's not possible not to be a student forever. And it was pretty much common at that time to be a student for 30 years or something like that. You were just part of the group before being student at university, so to say. And I like one of the examples I can tell you. It tells pretty much everything. A great philosopher, German philosopher, at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, at the very best period of the German universities, his name was Heinrich Rickert. And so he used to tell his students, whenever you want to tell me anything, first of all, translate it into Latin. And if you manage to translate it into Latin, tell it to me. But if you fail to translate, don't tell it to me. Why is it? The reason is pretty simple, because you cannot translate into Latin all those small interjections, all those small noises, the that non-autistic people use in order to communicate. What remains from the translation into Latin is only, so to say, the core idea, the very grammaticalized autistic structure of sentences. And that was not a joke, actually. This idea of having to translate something into Latin before saying it, that could be a great trick to make sure that the autistic student of yours understands you, and vice versa. And by the way, if you study languages, even nowadays, most of the time, you will still use great dictionaries and great manuals designed and written by some of that mad German scientists from the past. Maybe our Saudi friends here present don't have to learn Arabic that way, but I can tell you, if you are a Westerner and you study Arabic, there is one dictionary that trumps all of them, and that's this one, the Hans Wehr Dictionary of Arabic. I have spent so many hours, reading that fascinating dictionary, and the guy behind it, the Hans Wehr himself, was a completely crazy German scientist. And just one anecdote, among many of them, at the end of his career, it was World War II, and so his university was destroyed by the bombs. But he was supposed to give a lecture at 10 a.m. or something like that. So he went in the middle of the ruins, and he himself alone made the lecture. There were no students. No, because according to his work program or work contract, he was supposed to make that presentation. No, those people are the best one. No, and the same about the Hebrew grammar. The Hebrew grammar still in use for foreign students is the grammar designed by Gesenius, a mad German scientist from the beginning of the 19th century. That's the most comprehensive one. But we don't have time for all. By the way, I don't even know what time is it. Sorry. Yeah, we still have a few seconds. Sorry. Excuse me. Let's back to the presentation. Yeah, and maybe let's have another kind of examples. Now we will speak about computers and stuff like that. So nowadays everyone has a computer, I believe. But where do computers come from? Have you an idea of the origin of the computers? So we will see that together. This monster is the ancestor of all computers. It was the ENIAC. So it was a huge, huge thing. It had something like 27 tons, 17,568, if I'm correct, vacuum tubes. And it used that much power, that much electricity, that when they plugged it for the first time, there was a power cut in the whole city of Philadelphia. So, you know, when autistic odd jobs go wrong, that's what happens, but well, that's part of the story. But the interesting point, imagine that in your whole life, you have to make 5 million solderings. You have to solder 5 million items. That's what was inside. What's the aim of a normal person in their lives? Some people, especially in the Western world, they want to listen to music or whatever. But many people don't want to spend their life making 5 million solderings or, you know, all those elements, bringing them together. If we want to get that job done, you must hire an unusual person. But thanks God we have those people. And usually, imagine what happened during those years when our autistic friends, let's call him that way, was making that huge, huge monster behind me. Probably that his colleague laughed at him and told him, "Oh, you're stupid, enjoy life, have fun, listen to music and whatever." No, I still have that many million parts to... No, so people said, he's crazy, that guy is crazy. Yeah, but at the end of the day, when that computer started working, so the laughter stopped also. And usually what happens then, there is a businessman arrives and tells to the autistic friend, "Hey, psst, here you have $10. Give me your small engine, your small computer, and get out." No, and that's exactly the story behind most of the great companies in the Silicon Valley. Let me show you a picture that will tell pretty much everything. Sorry, this picture tells you the story of Apple, the company Apple. On this picture, you recognize most certainly one person. You recognize this one. This one is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the highly charismatic business leader, the entrepreneur. And everyone knows Steve Jobs. But actually, the truth is that Steve Jobs was really, he had poor skills in the technical work, in the technical job itself. He had great management ideas, but the reality of making stuff was not his strongest point. That's why he hired a second guy. That's the second Steve Wozniak. Nobody knows Steve Wozniak unless you're really into the field of computers. And Steve Wozniak was actually the guy who made all the real work. So the advertisement, the management, financial aspects, it was the non-autistic person, Steve Jobs, and the really things that matter, that was made by someone from our small club. And that was Steve Wozniak. And of course you may laugh at that second person and tell how he's not sexy, who will hire him. To be perfectly honest, I don't know any single Western business who would accept to hire that kind of person. I'm sorry, but actually he's the most skilled one. And history, so to say, has proven him right. Steve Jobs has died, but Steve Wozniak is still alive, enjoying himself. He's mining cryptocurrencies right now. And I can tell you, mining cryptocurrencies is very autistic. That's fun. I'm a miner also. I'm mining cryptocurrencies, And so it's lots of fun. And, and in that cryptocurrency, Bitcoins and stuff like that. In that cryptocurrency community, you will meet many, many people just like you, as weird as you, and sometimes much, much, much weirder, even if it's possible. So, and this picture tells pretty much everything, but in more or less similar terms, that's the story of almost every major company from the Silicon Valley. If you take Microsoft, the story of Bill Gates. Actually, Bill Gates sucks at management, sorry for saying that bluntly. He has never been interested in management or finances or stuff like that. For these aspect of things, he luckily enough, he has found a shark, so to say, a non-autistic shark that will make things done, So that's a good management idea. You need two different profiles, and those two persons have the potential to create the company. And maybe let me tell you a personal story. That picture, is it a photo or it's a drawing? No, actually it's a drawing. But it's just so realistic that you may believe it's actually a photography, but it's not. And I know personally the guy who makes those drawings. Actually, he's an autistic adult. And that autistic friend, actually, he doesn't speak at all. He's non-verbal. So when you are non-verbal in our modern world, that means that you are considered completely stupid. Well, that's what happened to him. Everyone considered him completely stupid. And he has devoted the first years of his life until the age of 19 or 20 just drawing crickets. His only point of interest was drawing crickets, just as like those crickets you see. And one day, a person from Kodak, Kodak, the company that sells the cameras, etc. A person from Kodak saw those drawings and said, wow, that guy with his pencil is more powerful, more sharp than our best cameras. And so Kodak has hired him. So nowadays, our friend is employed by Kodak. And he's in charge of the quality assessment of software at Kodak. Previously, 10 people had to do the job. But now our autistic friend does the job of 10 people. So the management of Kodak has fired the 10 non-autistic, lazy and idle people and has kept him. And please be reminded, he is a non-verbal person. He doesn't speak, I met him just once, and he could not even tell me hello, So some people are really amazing, and he's not an exception, so to say. We could say many, many things about that, but I will maybe slowly go to the conclusion, and so we will have more time to chat, if you don't mind. So, or another maybe interesting example of those universities and those German classical universities. Up until the 30s, in the US as well as in Germany, the term nerd was not used at the university. But why? Because nerds were the only student. being a nerd at the university until the 20s and the 30s of the previous century, that was the normal way of being a student. If, for instance, you know what is a nerd, well, some people who has pencils in the pocket and, interested just into a very, very specific field and not interested in parties and stuff like that, he was considered a nerd. But nowadays, unfortunately, the university has, so to say, changed, especially in the West. If nowadays you are a freshman at the university, in the first year at university in the West, and you don't attend the socializing classes and the classes of yoga and deep breathing and stuff like that, you'll not be successful. And it's not purely theoretical what I'm telling you, because now I am part of a group that creates an Autistic University in France. You can check our website. The website is aspifriendly.fr. The website is still bad because, we did not put in a strong emphasis on the website. We just build the university and let the website, we're not that relevant, but we will make it better in the future. So the aim of that university is, so to say, to promote students on the spectrum, that means autistic students, and to create for them a healthy, friendly and supportive environment, inclusive, if you prefer that term. And for the time being, we are still very young. We have about 20 students in the south of France, in Toulouse, but next year we will grow bigger and bigger. And actually, I'm part of the group, and it's an exciting adventure, because how many times in your life are you given the opportunity to create a university? It's just, And so I know the students personally, and I have had many talks with them. And so, for instance, there is one student. He's interested only in the brain. He is an expert in everything pertaining to the brain, all the cells and stuff like that. The problem is that he's 19, and the usual university wanted him to learn stuff like personal management and intersocial skills, and that's what usually is taught in the first year of university. But he doesn't care about that. He's interested only in the brain cells. And so part of my job was to try to convince lecturers that actually this person has the right to study from the very beginning only that interesting but narrow topic of brain and brain cells. And if that person lived in the 19th century, that wouldn't be a problem. Because in the classical university in Germany, for instance, at the beginning of the 19th century, you just entered, the university and attended whatever class you wanted, so to say. But, so we maybe have a question and answer session about this. And as a conclusion, I wanted to share with you this picture. Maybe a bit unusual to show a picture of a baby here, but that picture has a story. I have a very good friend with autism. I have known that guy for something like 16 years, even more than that. And that person actually devotes his entire life to odd and old languages. And his every effort, his every moment, all his energy goes into studying of old languages, like Old Irish, but not just Old Irish, all the dialects of Old Irish, all those, the old language that was in Penzance in Britain, that was this, No, there was a very specific local language, etc. So my friend devotes his life to these kind of topics. And he has extensively written dictionaries on those languages, but of course the dictionaries have never been published because no publisher will ever publish those books that will be read at most by one person every century, And that's what my friend does. And unfortunately, my friend had a very rough time. He was about to become homeless many times during the year of our friendship. And his situation was sometimes really hopeless. And I was really scared at some points because I was pretty much sure that he would really become homeless, that he would commit suicide, etc. But things went well because he found a job as a lecturer of Old Irish. The story is pretty easy. In France, only 3 people know Old Irish. So when the job was open, he had no competitor. And that's why he got the job. Dear friends, never study standard fields of study. Don't study English literature, please. Because in the field of English literature, you will have 1,000 students with you in the room. Study autistic fields of study like ancient Ethiopic. Because if you study ancient Ethiopic, you will be the only student in the room. The lecturer will be very happy to have you as a student. And most probably, the lecturer will be at least as weird as you. That's why he will consider you normal. So that was just my advice. So my friend now has a job, and even more than that, about 2 months ago, he became a father. That's something that was completely unexpected. To be perfectly honest with you, never in my life could I have imagined that friend one day would become a father. And that's the day of the birth of his son that problems really started. Why? Why is that? Because remember, that person, the father, devotes his entire life to studying and learning ancient languages. And imagine the fear, imagine that his son, the baby, could be neurotypical, non-autistic. Imagine you have a son who is not interested in ancient languages. How can you educate that person? And so he took that picture. The baby is about 5 or 6 hours old, just after birth. He took the picture of that baby and sent it to me. I sent it to some of my autistic friends, and we studied the picture. And according to my autistic friends who are experts in that field, the baby has already an autistic look or a gaze, autistic gaze, because instead of focusing on the picture taker, on the photographer, the baby actually studies the pattern with the fish there. Could be one of our own. I still don't know. The baby is way too young to have a proper diagnosis. But there is one thing I know, and I will end on that sentence. I don't know if the baby is autistic, but I know that my friend, the father of the baby, will be more reliable, and I could say a better father than many of them who are considered normal. Thank you.
So do you have some questions? The mic is over there, yes.
Hello, thank you so much for this lecture. It was amazing to see a different perspective. I would like to ask about the diagnosis of being autistic. And it's mainly philosophical question. Is it diagnosed through functional processing of the brain or social reaction?
Thank you for asking the first question, which is the hardest one usually. So I don't perform diagnosis myself. I'm not a physician, but usually the diagnosis involves quite a wide set of tests, and mostly social tests. They are different of them. I will not go into technical details. It's not a completely unified procedure. Every country has a, so to say, slightly different way of making the diagnosis. But unfortunately, or fortunately, until today, you cannot have a diagnosis based upon, so to say, a genetical test. It's still not that advanced. And I would say fortunately, because imagine if one day we have a kind of prenatal diagnosis of autism. I'm pretty sure that in Western country, almost all autistic babies would be aborted. That's what happens with, for instance, trisomia 21, etc. And so thankfully, so to say, I'm quite happy that we still don't have a way to make a diagnosis based upon, genetical testing. And so you have to go through different kinds of tests that mostly measure your social behavior, your social skills, and sometimes there is an IQ test, but in my opinion, the IQ test is not really relevant and not really important because, by the way, the IQ test was designed for and by non-autistic people. So usually the skills of autistic people are greatly undervalued by the IQ test, so that's why I'm a bit skeptical. And usually the whole procedure should not take more than 2 or 3 days, so to say. But there is that scientific diagnosis, so to say, but there is also this mutual recognition. If you know a little bit about autism, spotting autistic people in the classroom, for instance, is quite easy. It's almost as easy as spotting, let's say, excuse me, just a funny example, spotting Chinese people, No, it's almost that easy, Autistic people recognize themselves, because they have a very specific way of behaving. Oftentimes they have a very specific way of speaking. There is an autistic accent, which is frequently, not always, but frequently present. And so to say, yeah, it's really a kind of not a subspecies, but it's a way of being human. I would call it that way, maybe a bit different way. And I do believe that actually the challenge of diagnosing everyone with autism still lies ahead. And especially, for instance, we have a huge challenge as regards the diagnosis of girls or women, We still struggle with that. And also having a proper diagnosis at the earliest possible age, The best diagnosis is the earliest one, Because if you may have a diagnosis at the age of 1, you can do so many things with the baby. The baby can learn pretty much anything. But then if you have a diagnosis at the age of 40, 50, etc., it can get pretty much harder, so to say. The hope is never lost, but anyway, we have wasted so many years of that person's life. Sorry, I'm maybe too long in my answer.
Thank you very much. So my question is, what's the difference or the differences between autism and Asperger?
Thank you for the question. So the very simple and brief answer is there are no differences. There is no Asperger syndrome anymore. And the most recent, so to say, diagnosis manual, the DSM-5, there is no Asperger's syndrome anymore. We just use the term autism or ASD, autism spectrum disorders. But I don't like the term disorder. I don't think that autism is a disorder. Well, that could be probably the opposite. But, well, anyway, so the term autism encompasses everything. And let me maybe tell just a brief story about that. There are many reasons why the term Asperger's syndrome is not used anymore or should not be used. One of them has to do with history. Because, to say it very, very briefly, in the 30s, in Germany and in Austria, when the Nazis arrived and grabbed power in those countries, they were, so to say, as you know, that program of killing all the, so to say, people with special needs or disabilities, so the T4 program, called T4 program. And so every unusual child would go before a semi-military committee, and that military committee or the Nazi ideological committee would decide upon life or death of the child. And if the child was deemed unsuitable for, let's say, the Hitlerjugend, the Nazi organization for young boys, so the autistic child would be killed. And if there was still considered to be a glimmer of hope, that child was sent to the clinic of the Dr. Asperger. And what's the very scary part about that? Of course, there was no scientific criterion to distinguish, so to say, these two groups of people. And the main physician was deeply corrupt. And he accepted, so to say, any kind of money and bribes in order to save or to kill a child according to the wishes of the family of the child. And that's how the very idea of Asperger's syndrome was born, actually. That was this way. So whenever we use that term Asperger's syndrome, we, so to say, use an idea, a concept that has to do with that horrific Nazi past, and that's a bit awful, that's a bit scary. And on the contrary, I believe that everyone has skills and should have been given the opportunity to find their place in our world, and not just a tiny, so to say, elite selected by who God knows which criteria, So that's maybe, that's why I don't like the term Asperger's syndrome, but that's just a personal idea.
We will have the last question. Yes.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I have a short comment and a question. First of all, I think maybe, there's a need for the people who do focus very strongly on like a technical point or a technical thing in their profession, but there's also the need for the people who do the communicating between other, like in a social environment. So maybe Steve Jobs was also just autistic in a different kind of way. And in terms of my question, could you tell us a little bit about your work, what you do in politics, how that looks?
Thank you for both questions. Of course, whenever we talk about autism, usually people instantly think of computers and, programming and software and, it's just a mental connection. But according to a survey that we carried out, only about 15% of adults with autism are really interested in computers. That's nice, 15%, but that's a tiny minority, So what will we propose to the 85% of autistic people who are not interested in, so to say, computers? And just let me give you a very brief example. There is one field of Autistic World, of the Autistic World, that's under the radar, and that's the universe of design. And I could tell you quite many stories on that topic, but the universe of design, and especially in Paris, is, so to say, led by a very small group of autistic people. The leading designers, and I happen to know personally and quite well some of them, are, so to say, of our small group autistic club, and some of them have a diagnosis and are fully aware of it, some are not. And it's pretty much self-explanatory. Let's say that you work in the fashion industry. You have to have all the time new ideas. If you copycat what other designers do, so your company is doomed to failure. And so those big groups in the fashion industry, they are always looking for the weirdest designer, and it happens that some of them, are from our group. And when you have that visual hypersensitivity, it helps also. I know one of the quite famous designers in the field of fashion, and that person has the ability to distinguish colors that I cannot distinguish, and it's just, it's something given, it's not something you can learn, and then there are different people, there are different persons that will make the management and the advertisement, and so to say, the neurotypical stuff, so to say, and then the second question you asked was about me. Well, I'm a bit shy, so sorry, but I'm not a politician, thanks God. So I'm just an activist in the field of autism, and I have started doing that many years ago. I have given up my career at the university. I was supposed to be a philosopher interested in Oriental languages. So now I do that only during my holidays. I try to learn as many languages as possible. Of course, old and ancient languages are the best one, believe me. But during the year, so to say, during my working month, well, I have conferences more or less every day about autism, but almost never in English. Sorry, that's maybe my second or third conference in English about autism. I'm not involved in the English-speaking world. Sorry for that. And then also I try to write books. I have 2 radio broadcasts. And that's another point of, so to say, a matter of for reason to be quite sad, because the mainstream media are not interested in, so to say, people with disability. And I'm pretty much convinced that people with a disability should have a very direct presence in the media. That would change a lot. And that would even improve, I'm pretty much convinced, that would improve the quality of broadcasting a lot. And just let me tell you a small anecdote that will be last one. I'm running out of time. So, I have a job at the radio, as I previously said. And once I was talking with my boss, if we could have an autistic broadcast, let's say at 3 a.m., because most of autistic people prefer to live during the night. The reason is pretty obvious, because at night you don't suffer from the intensity of light, and the noise is lower, and so it's better to live usually during the night. And so the idea was to create an autistic broadcast at, let's say, 3 a.m. But my boss at the radio immediately answered, but what kind of advertisement could we use during that broadcast? So we would have to design autistic advertisement. Buy quickly the 8th volume of the dictionary of proto-Elamite. All the declensions. Autistic advertisement, that could be an idea. And the last book we published is an autistic cookbook, or if you are British, cookery book. We collected recipes from families. Every family that has an autistic child was qualified to send us their favorite recipe. We collected those recipes, about 50 of them, something like that, and And then, luckily enough, some famous chefs or cooks supported us, including the official cook of the French president, who is a very nice guy. And so together we have created probably the world's first autistic cookbook. And so every day we have lots of fun, so to say. Dealing with autistic and different people, it's not only deeply enriching, but it's also lots of fun. And I do hope that everyone will have that opportunity in their lives. Don't stay with boring, normal people. You are wasting your time. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.